What if I told you there was a theme park built at the base of a mountain, meant to be filled with laughter, families, and crowds? But instead, people remember it for something else entirely. A strange quiet, empty walkways, and a feeling that something about the place wasn't right. This wasn't an abandoned park, not at first. This was a fully operating attraction built in the late 1990s in the shadow of Mount Fuji. A park inspired by a story about a man who traveled the world. But here is where it gets unsettling, because even when the park was open, even when the rides were running, even when the guests were walking through the gates, some people said it never felt alive. They described hearing things they couldn't explain. Not voices exactly, but something close, like a distant conversation, just out of reach. And the deeper you went into the park, the quieter it became, like the sound itself was being swallowed. And that is only the beginning of this strange and mysterious park. Welcome to Death Kiss Traveler. My name is Marissa, your morbidly curious traveling host, and I am taking you to the dark side of Japan. Death Kiss Traveler is the only podcast that dives into the history, horror, and hauntings at amusement parks, the circus, or your local county fair. Follow me on social media for more dark stories and theme park history. Plus, I post photos of this episode and others that really help you see what these parks are like. Tonight, we are talking about the park that was built in the wrong place, based on the wrong story, at exactly the wrong time, and how it opened, how it struggled, and then disappeared. So completely, it almost feels like it was never meant to be there at all. Welcome to Gulliver's Kingdom, the story that the more I looked into, the weirder it got. So buckle up. Keep your arms and hands inside the ride, and let's go. Japan in the late 1990s wasn't the booming, unstoppable country people had come to expect. Just a few years earlier, Japan had been riding high, massive economic growth, booming cities, money flowing everywhere. It felt unstoppable. But then it all collapsed, and what followed was what many now call the lost decade. Businesses failed, investments dried up, and confidence, the thing that had fueled everything, just disappeared. Entire industries were scrambling to survive, and tourism, that became one of the biggest hopes for recovery. If people weren't spending money inside the country, maybe they could be brought in from the outside. So developers started thinking bigger, bolder, almost desperate. New attractions, new destinations, new reasons for people to come and spend money. And that's when an idea began to form at the base of Mount Fuji. A theme park. I love it. Something whimsical, something strange. On paper, it sounded exactly what Japan needed. But what they built and where they built it might have sealed its fate before it ever opened. Of all the ideas they could have chosen, all the stories, and all the themes, they landed on Gulliver's Travels. Do you know this story? Because I knew of it, but not really the actual tale. And after you hear this, you might question why anyone would think that this was a good amusement park theme. So I've got to start this episode out with a story. Not about a haunted amusement park, not about a deadly ride, but about a man who left home in search of adventure, and he came back unable to live among humans ever again. His name was Lemuel Gulliver, a surgeon by trade, a traveler by choice, the kind of man who believed the world was meant to be explored, mapped out, understood, experienced. But what he found there wasn't adventure, it was truth, and sometimes the truth is the most dangerous thing you can bring back with you. We start in Lilliput, where power is an illusion. When Gulliver first awakens, he can't move. His body is pinned to the ground. Ropes tightened across his arms, his legs, his chest. And then movement. Tiny footsteps, hundreds of them. He looked down to find himself covered in people, no bigger than his hand. This is Lilliput, a world obsessed with control. Status and rules so trivial they border on absurd. Wars are fought over which end of an egg should be cracked. Careers are built on who can perform the best tricks for all of those in power. And at first it feels laughable. But the longer Gulliver stays, the clearer it becomes. This isn't nonsense. It's a reflection of governments, of pride, of the dangerous way humans give power to the smallest ideas and let them grow into something deadly. Next, he arrives in Brobdingnag, where humanity is exposed and everything flips. Gulliver is no longer the giant. He is the curiosity, dropped into a land of towering humans, where every detail of the human body is magnified beyond comfort. Skin is no longer smooth, it's textured, porous, almost alive in a way that feels unsettling. Every flaw is visible, every imperfection impossible to ignore. He is picked up, examined, displayed, and for the first time, Gulliver sees humanity without distance, without illusion. And it's not beautiful, it's raw, it's fragile, and it's disturbing. And the third location is Laputa, where intelligence becomes useless. He finds himself beneath a floating island, a place suspended in the sky, Laputa, where intellect rules everything, but somehow nothing works. The people here are brilliant, obsessed with mathematics, music, and abstract theories. But they can't function. They forget to eat. They can't carry on conversations. They are so detached from reality that servants have to physically tap them to bring them back into the moment. Below them, a suffering world they barely acknowledge. And Gulliver begins to see something unsettling. That intelligence, without grounding, without humanity, is just another form of blindness. And the final truth is when humans become the animals. But nothing prepares him for what comes next, a place that feels calm, ordered, peaceful. This is the land of Houyhnhnms, horses who speak, reason, live without greed, without violence, without lies. And beneath them, creatures that look horrifyingly familiar. Humanoid, dirty, uncontrolled, driven by impulse, aggression, and instinct. They are called yahoos. And the longer Gulliver stays, the harder it becomes to deny the truth. At first, he resists the idea. He separates himself from them. I'm not like them, he believes. But slowly, that line disappears. Because he sees it everywhere, in their behavior, in their instincts, in himself. And something shifts. Gulliver stops identifying as human and starts seeing humanity beneath him. Something broken, something he wants no part of. Eventually, Gulliver is forced to return home, back to his wife and his children, his life. But he doesn't come back the same, because once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. He can't stand the smell of people, the sound of their voices, the closeness of their presence. He withdraws, avoids his family, and instead he spends his time in the stable, speaking to the horses, because in his mind, they are the only creatures left worth understanding. Gulliver's Travels was never meant to be a children's adventure. It's a slow unraveling, a psychological descent, a question disguised as a story. What if we are not as evolved or as civilized as we believe? What if underneath it all, we're just better dressed yahoos? And then someone built a theme park. Now here's where the story takes a turn, because centuries later, someone looked at this unsettling, philosophical nightmare of a story and thought, this would make a great theme park. A tale about a man who finds himself in a strange, unfamiliar world, surrounded by people who don't quite see reality the same way he does. It's whimsical, imaginative, and visually it works. Kinda. A giant man stretched across the ground, tiny buildings around him, guests walking through a world where everything feels just a little off. On paper, it really is perfect theme park material. But when you think about it, it's also a story about isolation, disorientation, and being somewhere you don't belong. And that's where things start to feel uncomfortable, because they didn't just build this park anywhere, they chose a location at the base of Mount Fuji, one of the most beautiful and most mysterious places in Japan. And by now, if you know me, if there's something a little off about a place, I'm already interested. And this place is known for its quiet, its stillness, the kind of silence that feels unnatural. And just beyond the edge of the park was a forest. Dense, dark, easy to get lost in. A place that for centuries had been tied to stories of spirits, of wandering souls, of people who entered and never came back. Aokigahara Forest. You may have heard of it called a different name, Sea of Trees. It's a dense forest at the northwestern base of Mount Fuji in Yamanashi Prefecture, Japan. It's renowned for its striking natural beauty, geological features formed from ancient lava flows, and its cultural association with mystery and introspection. A place that compasses can malfunction due to the magnetic rock it sits on. In Japanese folklore, this wasn't just a forest. It was a place where the boundary between worlds felt thinner. A place tied to eerie, spirits said to linger when a soul is unable to move on. Not violent, not always visible, but present. And when you step into the Aokigahara, it's not hard to understand why these stories took hold. The forest floor is formed from hardened lava. It's uneven, jagged, unpredictable. Tree roots twisted across the ground like veins, making every step feel uncertain. The density of the trees blocks out light and sound. Even the wind struggles to move through it. It's quiet in a way that feels unnatural. Not peaceful, just still. People who have walked through those trails often say the same thing. You lose your sense of direction faster than you expect. The paths, they seem to shift. Landmarks disappear, and it becomes less of a walk and more of a maze. And over time, that landscape, that silence, that disorientation found its way into literature, into film, into cultural memory. Stories began to paint Aokigahara not just as a forest, but as a place of reflection, a place where people came to confront something within themselves, but also a place that could leave you feeling deeply uneasy. Today, local authorities have worked to reshape that narrative. Along certain paths, you'll find signs, gentle, thoughtful, grounded, reminding visitors that this forest is more than its reputation, that it's ecologically unique, culturally significant, and worthy of respect. And yet, even with those reminders, even with the effort to guide people toward the understanding, that feeling doesn't go away, because it goes by another name, Suicide Forest. People want a number, a total. How many people have died in the forest? Something they can hold on to, measure, understand. But with Aokigahara, there isn't one. At one point in a single year, over 100 bodies were found in the forest. Let that sink in. Not over decades, not over time, 1 year. Other years, there were dozens more. And then something changed. The number stopped being released. But because the concern became that saying the number out loud might bring more people there. So now the total number is unknown. Officially tracked, not publicly shared, which means the truth is we will never really know how many people have walked into the forest and never walked out. Hundreds, thousands, more. Enough that the forest has a reputation that stretches far beyond Japan. Have you ever heard of it? I have. And when you stand at the edge of it, when you look past the trees, it's not the stories that hit you first. It's the silence. Just sit with that for a second. We have to discuss the unaliving rate in Japan. About 70% of them are men, and it's the leading cause of death for younger adults, especially men 20 to 44. Japan does not have the highest rates of unalivings, but it's up there for a developed country. In Japan, reported reasons often include health issues, including mental health, financial stress, work pressure, family or relationship issues. It's rarely one single cause, it's usually a combination. And for some, that pressure turns inward. That's when places like Aokigahara enter the story, not as a cause, but as a setting, a place that reflects something already there. There was a book written and described Aokigahara as the ideal place, which only amplified its reputation. Is it just a forest, or is it something more? Before Aokigahara ever made headlines, people already believed something was there. Not animals, not intruders, but remember those spirits that never left? The eerie? And their stories aren't just creepy, they are personal. One of the most common stories told by hikers is about a woman in white. She's seen standing just off the path, still, silent, almost blending into the trees. At first, people think she's lost. Some say they call out to her asking if she needs help. She slowly turns. Her face isn't distorted. It's not monstrous. It's just wrong. Empty, pale, expressionless, and then she's gone. No footsteps, no sound of movement, just gone. And we have to talk about the strings that lead nowhere. Some hikers bring tape or strings to mark their path, a popular technique used in Aokigahara because it's so easy to get turned around. But there are stories of people that follow someone else's trail. A line of tape tied carefully from tree to tree proved that someone had been there before them. So they follow it, thinking it will lead them back out. Except it doesn't. It just keeps getting deeper and deeper until suddenly it stops, midway between trees. No person, no campsite, nothing. Just a line leading to nowhere. And then there are the voices. Soft, almost familiar. Some people say they've heard their name being called from deeper in the forest. Others describe hearing quiet conversations like people are just out of sight. But when they move closer, there's nothing there. No movement, no footprints, just the same heavy silence and that feeling that they weren't alone. In Japanese belief, eerie aren't evil, they're unfinished. Spirits tied to a moment, to an emotion, to a place they can't leave behind. And forests like Aokigahara have long been seen as places where these spirits linger. Not because the forest creates them, because it holds onto them. They say if you see something in the forest, don't follow it. Don't answer it. And whatever you do, don't assume you're the only one trying to find your way out. Long before Aokigahara had a name people recognized, before it became tied to modern tragedy, there was an older story, one that feels almost too cruel to be true. It's called Ubasute, translated as abandoning an old woman. The idea was that in times of famine, when food was scarce and survival came down to impossible choices, families would carry their elderly relatives to the mountains and leave them there, not out of hatred, but out of pure desperation. As disturbing as that story sounds, it's the details that make Ubasute so hard to shake. It's the legend of family facing impossible choices would choose an elder, often a woman, to leave behind. Her own son would carry her on his back, walking deeper and deeper into the mountains. But here's the part that stays with you. As they traveled, she would quietly reach out, breaking small twigs, dropping pieces of branches along the path. Not to save herself, but to guide him, to make sure he could find his way back home. When they finally reached the top, there was no argument, no dramatic goodbye. He would set her down, and he would then leave. And she would stay alone, waiting through the cold nights with no food, no shelter, no one coming back, until eventually the mountain would take her. Slowly through hunger, through dehydration, through the freezing air. And not every version ends on a mountaintop. They left them anywhere the world could swallow them up. Because that was the goal, to leave them somewhere so remote, so unreachable, that death was guaranteed. Just not quickly. Some people believe places like Aokigahara, the forest at the base of Mount Fuji, may have been one of those very popular locations. A place already isolated, already unforgiving, long before it became known for anything else. Are these stories real? Well, we don't know. That history is a little blurred. Probably because people didn't want to document they left grandma to die in a forest. But I believe these stories carry merit. There are too many stories, even if it happened only a handful of times, which I don't believe in this case. Because as shocking as Ubasute sounds, it's not the only story like it. Versions of this idea, abandoning or ending the lives of the elderly, have appeared throughout history. In ancient Rome, there are accounts of men over a certain age being thrown into the Tiber River. In parts of India, a practice known as tulai kutho, though illegal today, has been reported where elderly family members are intentionally put to death, sometimes framed as an act of mercy. And that's what connects all of these stories. Not cruelty for the sake of it, but desperation, economic strain, or illness. The belief, right or wrong, that ending a life might ease suffering to protect the rest of the family. Different cultures, different centuries, but stories like this blur together. The idea of abandonment, isolation, people disappearing into the wilderness, and eventually, spirits. Because if someone is left in a place like that, alone, afraid, forgotten, what happens to them? In folklore, the answer is simple. They don't leave. The Aokigahara Forest didn't create the darkness. It just became a place where that darkness could exist without interruption. And that's what makes this so unsettling, because just outside of that forest, steps away from all that quiet, heavy stillness, someone built a theme park. Sounds like a great idea. But oh, it gets worse. It gets so much worse. Before we go any farther, we need to talk about something that makes this story a whole lot darker. The land near Mount Fuji, in the same area where Gulliver's kingdom was later built, was once tied to a group called Om Shinrikyo, a cult. Okay, so naturally, I had to go down this rabbit hole. Om Shinrikyo translates to supreme truth. But there was nothing peaceful about it. The group was founded in 1987 by a man named Shoko Asahara. And what started as something that looked harmless, yoga, meditation, spiritual growth, quickly became something much more extreme. Om Shinrikyo blended different beliefs of systems, Buddhism, Hinduism, and elements of Christianity. But at its core was one terrifying idea, that the world was heading to a catastrophic end, and only they would survive it. Members were taught to obey Asahara completely. He wasn't just a leader, he was seen as kind of a messianic figure, someone who could guide them through the apocalypse. And at its peak, the group had tens of thousands of followers worldwide. But what made them infamous, what turned them in from a secretive cult into something far more dangerous, is what they did next. In 1994, they carried out a chemical attack in Matsumoto. And then in 1995, they released sarin gas into the Tokyo subway system. The Tokyo subway sarin attack killed 13 people, and it injured thousands more. It made global headlines, and it was one of the most shocking acts of domestic terrorism in modern Japan. Behind the scenes, the group had been developing chemical weapons, experimenting with biological agents, and quietly preparing for what they believed was the end of the world. After the attack, authorities moved in, and on March 22nd, 1995, the cult's compound was stormed over by 1,000 police officers decked out in full-face gas masks. Members were arrested, operations were shut down, and years later, Asahara and 6 of his top followers were executed. Asahara had taken the lives of 27 or more people and had injured thousands more. But here's the part that matters for this story. The group had facilities right there, where the park would later be built. The cult itself didn't just disappear. It fractured, reformed into smaller groups, still monitored, still watched. And today it remains one of the clearest examples of how belief can turn into something dangerous. So when you hear that a theme park was later built in that same area, right next to the haunted forest, on land with that kind of history, you start to wonder, is this land cursed? It's what people call a heavy place, a place where the environment just feels off. The history is dark, and nothing seems to last. I can't prove that it's cursed, but I question it. Okay, despite all of the land's history, Gulliver's Kingdom opened in 1997 at the base of Mount Fuji, one of the most iconic, beautiful, and spiritually significant places in all of Japan. And I'm sorry, but who looked at this location and said, yeah, this feels like a great place for a theme park? It was supposed to be different, and so maybe it worked. Instead of massive roller coasters and thrill rides, Gulliver's Kingdom leaned into something a little more surreal, a little more story-driven. Inspired by Gulliver's travels, the park's centerpiece was exactly what you would expect. A massive Gulliver, stretched across the ground, tied down, motionless. Guests could walk around him, climb onto parts of the structure, stand next to his face, frozen in place, his eyes staring upward. It wasn't thrilling, it was strange, almost like walking through a scene that had already ended. There were smaller rides, family-friendly attractions, a bobsled, play areas for the kids. Nothing groundbreaking. No massive draw, no headline attraction that made people travel across the country just to see it. It felt quiet, underwhelming, and even when it was opened, from the start, attendance was low. People came, but not in the numbers that they needed. And I had to dig into why. There were a few reasons for it. People were still feeling the effects of the economic downturn. There was competition from larger, more exciting parks. Think Tokyo Disney. And the location, well, it wasn't exactly convenient. But there was something else people couldn't quite explain. A feeling. And whether you believe in energy, coincidence, or just bad planning, that proximity next to the forest mattered. You're a family visiting the park. You walk through the entrance, you hear music playing, kids laughing. But just beyond the edge of the park, past the rides, past the pathways, there's a wall of trees. Dense, dark, unmoving. And you know, even if no one says it out loud, what's inside that forest. That's what makes this place so unsettling, because Gulliver's Kingdom was built for escape. But we're really gonna put rides here. Okay. They tried to build a place to forget stress, forget reality, step into something playful. But right next to it was a place where people went when reality became too much. And nothing says family fun quite like existential dread. It felt less like a fairy tale, more like a metaphor. On the surface, Gulliver's Kingdom didn't fail for one dramatic reason. There wasn't one single accident. No scandal that shut the gates overnight. Instead, it slowly died. And the reasons why are a mix of business decisions, bad timing, and something a little harder to explain. When the park opened in 1997, Japan was deep in what was known as the lost decade. After the economic bubble burst in the 90s, people were spending less. Travel dropped, entertainment budgets, they shrank, and theme parks depended on disposable income. And at that moment, people didn't have much of it. So right out of the gate, Gulliver's Kingdom was already fighting an uphill battle. Let's be honest, this wasn't Tokyo Disney. There was no major thrill rides, no groundbreaking attractions, nothing that made people say, we have to go there. The park leaned heavily on small rides, play areas, and that creepy Gulliver statue. But let's be honest, none of that created excitement. it created confusion. Because instead of something dynamic, you have a massive figure lying still, pinned down. Well, that's not thrilling. It's just oddly uncomfortable. And we have to add that location was a huge problem. Yes, it was near Mount Fuji. That sounds like a dream. But in reality, it wasn't easy to access. It wasn't near major cities like Tokyo or Osaka. It required effort to get there. And here's the key. If people are going to travel that far, they want something worth it. Gulliver's Kingdom didn't deliver that payoff. But the biggest part was where the park sat, right next to a haunted forest. Even if visitors didn't know the full history, they felt it. That wall of dense forest, that silence just beyond the park. It created a strange emotional contrast that you're supposed to feel joy, but right next door is something heavy and quiet and unsettling, and whether people consciously realized it or not, it affected the experience. Families didn't linger. The energy, well, it just didn't feel right. And it's hard to build a carefree atmosphere when the environment around you doesn't match it. You'd expect a place like Gulliver's Kingdom to feel alive. Noise, laughter, music echoing through the paths. But people who went there said it never really felt that way. Even when it was open, it felt quiet. Not a peaceful quiet, not a relaxing quiet, a wrong quiet. Visitors described walking through wide pathways with almost no one around. Rides were running, but there were no lines. Music playing, but somehow not filling the space. And the strangest part about the music is the deeper you went into the park, the more it felt like the sound was being absorbed, like something was swallowing it. Some people said it felt like the forest nearby was bleeding into the park itself. Like you weren't fully separated from it, that even standing in the middle of a family attraction, you were still too close to something else. Not everyone noticed it, but the ones who did, they all described it as almost the same way. It didn't feel like a place where people were supposed to gather. And maybe that's what stayed with them. Not fear, not panic, just that quiet, lingering feeling. Something about that place was never meant to feel alive. The park was partially funded by government-related investments tied to economic stimulus efforts, meaning it wasn't purely driven by demand. It was built to create tourism, not respond to it. The park was projected to bring in 1.5 to 2 million visitors per year. That's what they hoped for. But in reality, only 300,000 to 400,000 visitors per year at best. And in some reports, it was even lower depending on the season. The support wasn't enough to keep it alive long term. It opened in 1997, closed in 2001. That's 4 years. For a theme park, that's a blink. It never had time to build a strong reputation. And one of the most disturbing problems with this park was going back to the cult. I always describe parks with the smells of yummy food and sweet treats. But this park, it smelled like chemicals. Remember the cult? Well, the park sat on the former headquarters where they produced sarin gas. Quote, "I can still smell the chemicals sometimes when I take a walk in the morning," end quote, said 69-year-old Nori Okamoto, who lives just 100 meters, 330 feet, from one of the cult's former sarin production facilities. Imagine going to a family theme park and catching a faint smell of sterile, almost industrial chemical smell in the breeze. That alone gives this place a subconscious unease. When you step back, it wasn't just a failed park. It was the perfect storm. Bad economic timing, weak attractions, difficult location, and an atmosphere that just didn't feel right. Gulliver's Kingdom didn't collapse overnight. It just never found a reason for people to stay. And in a place built for escape, that might be the biggest failure of all. If I smelled chemicals at a park and the rides were just okay, I would not be back. Why waste the money? After it closed, the park wasn't immediately demolished. It lingered. Rides were left standing, pathways overgrown, buildings slowly decaying. And right in the center of it all was that massive, unsettling statue of Gulliver just lying there tied down. Except for now, there's no crowds, no laughter, just wind and silence. Once the park shut down in 2001, the smells got worse. Mold was growing inside buildings. Rust and damp metal, rotting wood from exposed structures, and stagnant water was collecting in ride areas. I can't imagine what this smelled like. Basically, it had that classic abandoned place smell, wet decay, metal, and time with a hint of toxic fumes. Of course, an abandoned park led to urban explorers and ghost hunters. Some people say it wasn't what they saw in Gulliver's Kingdom that scared them. It was what they heard. At first, it was subtle. Footsteps, soft, steady, echoing against the stone pathways. The kind of sound you would expect to hear if someone else was walking through the park with you. Except no one was there. They would stop, and the footsteps would stop too. They would start walking again, and so would the sound. Always behind them, always just out of sight. And then, just as it felt like whatever would finally reach them, it stopped. Right before it got too close. Like it didn't need to come any farther. Another group had a different experience, and it was worse. They said it started with whispers, so faint they could barely make it out. At first, they thought it was just the wind moving through empty structures, until the whispers didn't fade. They grew louder, clearer, closer, until it sounded like voices, multiple voices, layered over each other, overlapping, frantic, calling out, begging, desperate pleas for help. The kind of desperation that doesn't feel fake or imagined. It felt real. Too real. It shook them enough that they left immediately. No exploring, no second guesses. They just got out. But it didn't end there. When they got home, they started going through the photos they had taken, expecting to see nothing more than an abandoned park. At first, everything did look normal. Empty paths, rusted structures, silence frozen in places. But then they noticed something in the background. Shadows. Dark shapes that hadn't been there before. Standing between buildings. Lingering along the pathways. Clustered in places that should have been completely empty. Figures. Not clear enough to make out faces, but unmistakably human. A photographer once went to Gulliver's Kingdom alone, determined to capture what was left of the park. From the moment she arrived, something felt off. She set up her camera, aimed it toward the massive Gulliver statue, but it wouldn't focus. The lens kept hunting, blurring, refusing to lock onto anything. She adjusted the settings, tried again, nothing. She moved to a different spot, same thing, another angle, another attempt, still nothing. It didn't matter where she stood. Every time she tried to take a photo, the camera malfunctioned. Like something didn't want to be seen. Or maybe didn't want to be captured. Eventually frustrated, she gave up and she went home. Later that night, she sat down to go through of what little she had managed to shoot. At first, everything looked normal. The empty park, the Gulliver statue lying on the ground, just as it had been left. But then she noticed something. Around Gulliver, in the dirt, there were shapes. Faint at first, but the longer she stared, the clearer they became. Outlines. Human outlines. Dozens of them, surrounding the statue, stretched out across the ground. And they weren't random. They were positioned just like Gulliver. Pinned down, held in place, as if something or someone had tied them there. When she zoomed in, she could see their faces. Frozen, twisted, staring upward, like they were trapped in that exact moment. Like they knew something was coming, and whatever it was, would never let them go. There's something else people started talking about after Gulliver's Kingdom closed. Not the ride, not the silence. Her, the woman in red. Urban explorers and ghost hunters, people who weren't supposed to be there, started sharing the same story. At first, it didn't even sound like a ghost story. Just someone standing in the distance, a woman wearing red. And in a place where everything had faded, where everything had rusted and turned gray, she hadn't. They would see her near the pathways, sometimes close to the massive Gulliver statue, just standing there, completely still. Too still. At first you think it was just another person, someone else exploring, but then something starts to feel off. She doesn't move, she doesn't shift her weight or look around. She doesn't react. Even when it's clear, she knows you're there. And somehow, you can feel that she does know. Some people said they tried to get closer, moving slowly, carefully, keeping their eyes locked on her the entire time. But the distance never made sense. Suddenly, she would be far, too far to make out clearly, and then suddenly, she wasn't. Closer. No footsteps, no sound, just closer. And then she's gone. Not walking away, not slipping behind anything, just gone. Some say she appears in the fog, half hidden like she's not fully there. Others say it's the red that gets you first. That color, too bright, too alive, in a place that feels completely dead. Like she doesn't belong in the park, but the park doesn't belong to her either. So what is she? Some believe she came from the forest. Aokigahara just steps away. A place already filled with stories of people who wandered in and never came back out. In Japanese folklore, they claim she's a eerie, a spirit that lingers. Not violent, not always seen clearly, but present, wandering and stuck. Others think she's something else entirely. Not a spirit trying to be seen, but a memory, playing over and over again. Like the land itself is remembering something, because this park was built in the wrong place, next to a forest filled with death, on land tied to a cult that created one of the most horrifying attacks in modern history. And for a few short years, people came here for fun, for laughter, for escape. And then it all stopped. But maybe not everything left. Maybe she didn't. And if you ever found yourself standing there in the silence and you saw something red in the distance, would you walk closer? Eventually, the decision was made. It had to go. Between 2002 and 2007, the park was slowly dismantled, and it wasn't some dramatic overnight implosion. It was methodical, quiet, piece by piece. Attractions were torn down, structures removed, grounds were cleared, and that giant Gulliver statue, he was cut apart. Today, the land is largely empty, repurposed in small ways, almost unrecognizable. If you didn't know it was there, you wouldn't. There's no preserved rides, no ruins left behind like other abandoned parks, just absence. They built a park based on a man who couldn't live among people anymore. And when it failed, they didn't preserve it. They didn't reimagine it. They removed it, piece by piece, until it was like it had never existed at all. They say, on one of the final days of demolition, there were only a handful of workers left on site. Most of the park was already gone, rides dismantled, buildings reduced to frames, pathways leading nowhere. And in the center, what remained of Gulliver, he wasn't whole anymore, just sections, was a hand, part of the face, and pieces of rope that held him all down. It was early morning, cold, an eerie cold that chills you to your bones. One of the crew members had been assigned to help remove the remaining pieces of the statue. He later said, "It felt wrong walking out there alone. Not dangerous, just wrong. It was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the sound of his own footsteps against gravel." He heard something. Not loud, not clear, but enough to stop him. a voice. At first, he thought it was another worker, maybe someone calling his name from the remaining structures. But when he turned, there was no one there. He kept walking, trying to shake it off, but the closer he got to the statue, the clearer the sounds became. Not words, not exactly, more like murmuring, like multiple voices speaking all at once. He later described it like this, quote, "It didn't sound like someone was talking to me, it sounded like something was talking around me," end quote. And then it stopped. Completely. The silence that followed was worse, because that's when he noticed something else. The ropes, the thick, sculpted ropes that had once pinned Gulliver down, they were gone. He froze because he had seen them earlier. He was sure of it. Wrapped around the arm, across the chest, and the face, exactly where they were supposed to be. But now nothing. Just smooth concrete. He stepped closer. His heart was racing, trying to make sense of it. And that's when he heard it again, right behind him. Not a whisper this time, not distant, close. A breath. He turned fast, and nothing. No one was there. No movement, just the empty park. And beyond it, the dark tree line, still watching. He didn't finish his shift that day. He didn't come back the next day either. And according to the story, he refused to talk about it after that. Now, there is no official record of these stories. No report, no incident filed, just stories. They're passed quietly, worker to worker, friend to friend. But here's the thing about places like this. Places built on stories of isolation, of losing your senses of reality, places sitting near forests where people go and don't come back. They don't always leave behind proof. Sometimes they leave behind stories. And sometimes, I think that's worse. Gulliver's kingdom is now gone. No rides, no crowds, just quiet at the base of Mount Fuji. A place that once felt off, too empty, too still. And maybe that's the strangest part. Not that it failed, but how easily it disappeared. So if this story stayed with you, if it gave you that uneasy feeling that you can't quite explain, go leave a 5-star review and follow along, because there are so many more places like this, just waiting to be uncovered. This episode for me was absolutely wild. The more I dug into it, the crazier the stories got. And I don't speak Japanese, so I hope I said all of these words correctly. But that forest, I've heard about it for years, but I never knew there was a theme park sitting right next to it. I posted last week that sometimes these stories find me, and this is one of them. This story found me, and telling it to you gave me chills multiple times. This podcast is written and researched by me, Marissa, produced by Sunkissed Traveler, the travel agency that takes the stress out of planning a vacation. Wherever you want to go, Disney, a cruise, how about Japan? Sunkissed Traveler takes care of all the details. See show notes for details or visit sun-kissedtraveler.com. And I'll see you next week with another true crime episode that is absolutely wild. Goodbye, my spooky travelers.